Cryptid creatures are lurking everywhere. Just outside the safety of your home lurks something from your deepest, darkest nightmares. Over the past few years, I've been sent allegedly true encounters with every creature imaginable, and the flow of encounters doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. Joining me today, helping me share your tales of terror, is my friend from the Strangest YouTube channel. If you're looking for more spooky stories about cryptids after this video is over, be sure to check out the video I did with the Strangest on their channel, detailing the terrifying Jersey Devil. You can find that in the description down below. As always, if you have a story you'd like to share in a future video, be sure to send it in at swampdweller.net. I'd love to share your story. Now, let's get in to these allegedly true tales of terror. I just moved to North Dakota to work the oil field business with my friend I'll call Sean. I was initially unsure of what the job entailed, but I knew it meant a lot of income and being able to see and work, and my longtime friend sold me on the deal. As it turned out, I loved the job. 12-hour days and on day shift with the kind of money we were making was the easiest street in my opinion. I mean, basically, all we did during the day was stay on site and make sure the place didn't burn down. The job was perfect. This all came to a halt one day when my boss came to me and asked if I wanted to work night shift instead, and even go around to different sites. We all know, if your boss is asking, it's likely not smart to say no. So, I accepted. Basically, I checked 6 sites, 3 times a night with 2 hours of downtime between each site check. Now, to give you an idea of the placement of these sites, just imagine sites at least 12 miles apart, sometimes further, in the middle of nowhere, with only old farms and some dirt roads near them for miles. That's how these sites were, and how alone I'd be while out that night. One other thing is winter was just setting in, so we had constant snow and blizzards. Now that you've got a great visual of my situation, I will begin to explain an experience I had while working the night shift. There's one site out of all the sites that is particularly creepy. This site is the farthest one away on my route, and is in the most dimly lit of all of them. Arriving at the said site, I pull up to the pump house, put on my gloves, my hard hat, switching my line on as I do, and step outside. Walking around, I'm careful with my steps as the headlight only illuminates what you're looking at. Everything else is a pitch black, cold, snowy abyss. The thing about the snow is you can tell if anyone has been around or is around, but there were no truck tracks, so I knew I was alone. My usual search goes from left to right, looking closely for leaks or potential leak areas on the tanks, which are roughly 20 feet by 10 feet wide. As I'm coming up on my last tank, I notice what looked like a pair of white tennis shoes dart behind a tank. My first thought is, what would anyone be doing out here without a truck? This made my stomach sink, partially out of confusion, but mostly because I was 20 miles away from civilization, alone, and it was like 15 degrees outside. The thought again crosses my mind. What would any sane person be doing out here without a truck? Slowly, and quite hesitantly, I go toward the tank I saw the shoe from. I'm taking it slow, one step at a time, and I'm beginning to feel on edge at this point. Just when my heart feels like it's about to explode a tiny bit, a white rabbit comes out hopping from the area. I throw my head back, breathe a sigh of relief, and have a laugh of the realization that it was just a bunny. This being the end of the line, I find a place to park soon after and kick back in my seat to relax. You need to understand, sleeping on the job isn't something you're supposed to do, but it happens sometimes, and before I knew it, I passed out. 40 minutes later, my body spazzes awake and I look around to see no one. Needing to pee, I step out, but before I can even step on the ground, I freeze. There are tracks in the snow, leading up to my truck. These aren't rabbit tracks either. They're human-like. They aren't the right size to be mine either. The tracks lead over to the tanks I was checking earlier. I question, who the hell could be out here and why? I began to get that sinking feeling again as I followed the tracks. I made sure to grab the biggest wrench I had from the truck just in case. Whoever was out here, were they crazy? Did they potentially need my help? I wasn't sure, and about 20 feet from the dark tank, I freeze and call out, asking who's there and if they need any help. Silence sets in for a minute, the only sound coming from the snow and the wind blowing it. I feel simultaneous loneliness, and yet I know I'm potentially being watched. The loneliness is the realization I'm on my own, and if something goes wrong, I'm probably screwed. Trying to set this thought aside, I try to tell whoever is back there I'm aware they're there. Still, silence is the only response I get. I walk forward 5 more feet and peer around the tank area. What I see doesn't register immediately, but when it does, I'm in shock. There's blood, and I mean lots of blood. I felt nauseous, but was curious, so I stepped closer. That's when I see an antler. Is it a deer? Finally, I make my way close enough to see a dead deer, its throat slit and blood everywhere. The thing was, its organs were in clear display as well, and streaming on the snow, so I know the kill was fresh. Someone or something had eviscerated this deer and left it here. Who or what would do this, and why? I turn my attention back to the shoe prints, and while it's obvious there was a lot of shuffling around the deer itself, I'm not convinced, just yet, that whoever was there was responsible for killing the deer. This was then I noticed the shoe prints leading off and back to the tanks. Slowly, extremely hesitantly now, I follow these tracks. I'm shaking, but not from the snow. No, I'm shaking from fear. The tracks themselves appear to be blood red. The tracks lead to a drop-off, and I peer off into the distance, when 40 feet away, I see something that makes me damn near shit myself. The thing I see is half of a human face peering back at me from over the hill. The face was old, tattered, with long mangy hair and blood from the nose down. I jumped so hard I fell, but was immediately on my feet seconds later. I threw my stuff into my truck bed, got into my truck, and floored it as far and fast as I could. I was dizzy and couldn't help but think that thing had been right outside my unlocked truck door, looking at me while I slept at one point. If it didn't already have the deer, would it have done what it did to the deer to me? I never told my company about the person or thing that I saw. I simply told them I noticed the deer and thought it was strange. At which point, they removed the body. An older resident of the area, who was on site that day, mentioned it looked like a couple coyotes got to it and were trying to drag it out of the predator's sight. I knew better though. I still work with the company. Until this day, I still work nights and have to check in on this site. I'm always in and out in minutes, and never linger, nor do I sleep out there.
In the spring of 2017, I went to JDC, the Juvenile Detention Center. The jail I was in was called the Multi-County Juvenile Det Center. When I arrived at my temporary home, I was placed in a cell in Delta 3, which is on the ground floor. In my cell was a ground window, a toilet, and a water fountain. And that was it. The first night was just fine, or fine for being in jail. I slept alright, and nothing bothered me outside of being in jail. 2 weeks later, and on a sleepless night, I decided to get up and walk around my cell out of boredom. I began walking at around 3 in the morning, according to the clock. Looking out of my cell, I noticed there were no guards around. I assumed the guard was on break, and just continued to do my own thing. I mean, where was I gonna go, right? Eventually, I sat down and looked out of my ground floor window. I tranced out for a moment when something caught my attention that snapped me back to reality. The jail is out near the woods, so the window looks out to the tree line. While watching the horizon, I noticed something on all fours crawling in the distance. The thing I saw wasn't like any animal out there. It was completely pale, had 2 black eyes, and a slit for a mouth. This freaked me out and I gasped, backing away from the cell as I did. I pushed the emergency button on my cell and waited for the guards. I moved back to the window while waiting and saw the thing run back into the woods. When the guards arrived, I tried to explain the situation, which didn't help anything, of course. In fact, they said I was bored and trying to start a commotion, and because of that, they wrote me up and extended my sentence. Due to my write-up, I was forced to stay in my cell for 24 hours for the next few days. I spent days just thinking about what I saw and sitting there afraid. I was also pissed about my situation. I believe in monsters to this day.
This story starts at my mom's place in Ohio. I was 11, and I've always believed in things like Bigfoot. At this point in time, I'm at my mom's house spending time with her boyfriend, and my brother. My parents being divorced, it was nice to finally get a week off to be able to go out and visit her. One morning, we all get up and go to Raccoon Park. My family is fishing there, when our dog, Rue, runs off. I go off in search of Rue, and while looking for him, I notice some boats. I grab Rue and return him to our family, and my mom and I decide to take one of the boats onto the river. They aren't fancy, they're just those little pedal boats that you can rent. While pedaling, we decide to go to the other side of the bank, near a forest, to see if we can find some fish. As we got closer, we began to hear rustling in the trees. We didn't think much of it initially. We figured it was probably another person or maybe a raccoon or some other animal. Eventually, we narrowed down the possibility to an animal, as people weren't really in the area we were at. This was when something fell from the tree. We thought maybe a squirrel, but that's when we noticed there weren't any squirrels around. Then, out of the blue, a huge log flies by us and lands just super close to our boat. Freaking out, we immediately pedal away and back to the boathouse. As we were heading back, I looked behind me and noticed a 9-foot-tall hairy creature watching us from the trees on the bank. Shortly after, I noticed the creature, it darted off into the forest, never to be seen again. I initially thought I was hallucinating until some people in the park, on the bank, asked if I saw what was across the way while pedaling back. 2 weeks later, I'm video chatting my mom and she mentions 2 guys took a pedal boat out by the area we were at, and while they were there, something attacked them from out of nowhere. They weren't hurt, more spooked, but they did get a decent glimpse of this creature. I'll never be sure what it was, but I'll always believe it was Bigfoot. The following story happened when I was 10. It has remained in the back of my mind and in dreams for years after. As a kid, I'd often stack my toys on my windowsill and play with them. My window looked out to the front lawn, and I always loved the view. I also was a nosy kid, so I kind of liked seeing what was going on outside. Something about watching the neighbors go about their daily routines just made me feel safe, and I really did enjoy it. Sometimes, when bored, I'd even watch the animals we had around the area. The window I speak of was pretty big. It had a screen between the window and outside as well, which helped keep the cats from jumping out, as I'd often keep the window open, much like I had it today. On that day in question, I was just chilling in front of the window, reading, and also people watching and snooping where I could. As I'm reading, I suddenly get the sense something is watching me. Looking up, I see something standing there. It had the body of a man, the head of a jackal, and looked like a twisted version of Anubis for a lack of better visual. This thing would just stand there, watching me, a sinister smile on its face as it did. I remember his ears were extremely pointed, and would stick up as though he were on alert. I was frozen in place, afraid as the thing stared at me. This lasted for what seemed like an eternity before the thing finally lumbered off into a wooded lot next door. Once I was able to move again, I rushed for the front door to see if I could get a better view of the thing. To my surprise, it had simply disappeared. After this day, I never left my window open again. I kept the blinds closed, and even today, I keep the black curtains over them, refusing to look outside my window again. I'm still unsure of what that thing was, but it felt quite predatory. I'm just grateful I never saw it in person again, and I hope I never do. If any of you possibly have any idea what this thing could have been, I would love to know. This following story is my father's. Every other summer, he and some friends go bass fishing in Maine. This particular encounter they had happened around 2 or 3 in the morning. My dad left his tent having to go to the bathroom. As he was relieving himself, he heard a snap about 25 feet away from him. Looking up, he saw nothing initially. There was no animal or human in sight, and things were eerily quiet as he puts it. There were no sounds in the forest as there normally would be. Still, wanting to be sure there wasn't some sort of animal out there that could be a threat, he shined his flashlight into the distance. It was then he saw a pair of eyes in a heavily wooded area. He was too far away to tell exactly how far off the ground they were, so he headed towards the set of eyes. As he did so, whatever was in the woods ran off with a fury. While it was running, my dad was able to get a much better glimpse of it in the clearing. He said it stood no less than 8 feet tall and had an awful smell emanating from it, almost skunk-like. My dad believes it was a Bigfoot, and although he told his friends about the experience the next day, they all agreed to stay the rest of the week together. He had no way to know for sure, but my dad believes it was a curious Bigfoot and wasn't too much of a threat. He didn't feel like it was trying to hurt him, and if it wanted to, it easily could have, right? What are your guys' thoughts on this encounter? One rainy night in the middle of May, 2003, my friends and I were hanging out at around 9 p.m. We are Navajo, getting water for the livestock in Sunrise, Arizona. We are having a good time, and Tony was driving. I was on the passenger seat, and John and Cody were sitting in the back seat. We were all telling jokes and cracking up until we reached the windmill. Once we'd arrived, we started the water and waited for it to fill the barrel. While waiting, we decided to go walking around looking at the local cows. Unfortunately, this led to the barrel overflowing, at which point John ran to pull the hose. John is a professional sheep herder, by the way. After the situation was contained, we went back, and at this time, I was going to drive. At least, I believed I was, as when I got into the truck it wouldn't start. I tried several times to start the truck, and even looked under the hood to get it to do anything. Nothing was out of place, so I went back into the truck and tried again. Tony, John, and Cody wanted to go mess with the cows, and so they soon left while I continued to work on the truck. While working on the truck, there was a sudden sound that was so loud that it made me jump. I recollected myself after that, thinking maybe it was just the guys throwing rocks to scare the cows. The moment I started working on the truck, I heard the sound once again. I got out of the truck and yelled for the guys to stop making that sound. Soon after, they started to come back. Once they got back to the truck, I asked them if they were throwing rocks at the windmill. They all said no, at which point, I got chills. When we made our way back to the cows, Tony stuck with me. While chilling with Tony, we all heard the sound again. This time, it was a harder hit. Tony yelled to them and told them to stop doing that. The others didn't answer. Usually, they would reply to him pretty quick. He called them once more, but no one yelled back. We got worried, and we started walking out into the dark looking for them. We called out their names, but no one answered. The only light we had was the moonlight, which kept coming in and out of the clouds as we didn't have any flashlights on us at the time. This made it extremely difficult to see. After about 10 minutes, we finally found them. They were on the ground, almost shivering, and their eyes were wide open. Tony and I thought about the worst that could have happened. We have heard stories about these skinwalkers. We have experienced encounters before, but not like this, or at least not with us out here in the open. We knew what we had to do, but we didn't know if there was only one or a few. Then, we heard something scrambling in the bushes nearby. Tony and I freaked out, and soon after we heard it again, but on our right this time. Soon after that, we heard it on our left, and then in front of us, and then behind us. This all happened in about 3 seconds. We got the chills to say the least. I knew Tony almost always had some Navajo mountain tobacco or blessing cedar to protect us from the skinwalkers, but he didn't have either of it this time. Tony and I made a run to the truck with the half-naked bodies of Cody and John. We heard the footsteps of something running after us as we made it back to the truck and we all got back in. The second we slammed the door shut, it got unnaturally silent. Soon after this, the witchcraft that the skinwalkers put on Cody and John seemingly wore off. We were just about to relax when some sickly-looking coyotes jumped onto the hood of the truck. There were 3 creatures that had the body of a coyote, but had little more human-like features. They could walk on their 4 legs, or just their back 2 legs. They had eyes that were crystal and blood red. They had the smell of dead animals. The smell was so unbearable we all fell back into our seat and started to scream in disgust. The creatures started to sing or chant, and we knew they were speaking in Navajo, but we were so terrified we couldn't even tell what they were saying. This was when some tall, long-haired, furry black creature with crystal-like eyes showed up just outside Tony's window, breathing heavily, with the ugliest face we've ever seen. Tony looked at it, and jumped back so quickly and powerfully that he almost knocked down Cody. The creature blew something like powder through the window onto us. We all started to slow our breathing and calm down, and after a matter of seconds it was quiet, and we all passed out. When we woke up the next day, we were face down, ass up, in Tony's bedroom. We never found out what happened to those skinwalkers, or us for that matter. We had a series of ceremonies that were used to protect us from the sickness that the skinwalkers placed upon us. The medicine man told us that the people who did this were after us because of jealousy. They were jealous of us because of all the things we have and all the accomplishments we've done. So, we had their power turned around to backfire on them. After we had the ceremonies, Tony went back to his house and his mom said that night, we just walked through the door about 1:30 a.m., got a glass of water, and went into my room. She also said we were quiet. She thought we were sleeping. To this day, we still hang out with each other. We still get water and take care of the livestock. We will never forget what happened that night. That's for sure. I live in England, and this story happened to me when I was somewhere between 10 to 12 years old. My family and I were on the way back from taking my brother's friend home, and since we had our dog Mickey, we decided to take a shortcut through the woods. Shortly after heading into this small forested area, my dad and brother went on ahead, leaving my mom, our dog Mickey, and I behind to walk on our own. The forest, as I said before, wasn't exactly the biggest. It was a small area that I believe was used as a community area after someone used it for their garden. A few minutes into the walk, and talking about our days, my mom and I realized we could hear something behind us. Looking back, we initially saw nothing, and thought nothing really of it, although it was pitch black outside at this point, and the only real lights came from the occasional car that would meander down the main road a little ways after. After waiting a few more minutes, we finally decided it was probably just an animal, and turned and continued on our walk. After a bit of walking though, we began to hear voices. Creeped out, we sped up to my dad and brother. Mickey had been barking and feeling very weird. The entire feel of the forest was just so unnerving at this point. The voices we heard were definitely not adult, and we can't imagine kids being out so late. We eventually got out of the forested area and decided it'd be better to go back on a normal day. There's something out there, and I'm not going back to find out what. My story takes place 4 years ago, when I was just 14 years old. I wanted to go hunting on our property, which is about 370 acres in total. It took some convincing, but my old man finally agreed that I could go hunting on my own. When it was time to go, I was stoked. I grabbed my molly bag and crossbow before jumping onto my dirt bike and setting off for my hunt. It was about 8 in the morning when I got to my grandpa's property and saw all the no trespassing signs. I ignored these and sprayed doe piss to mask my scent before rushing off to my favorite tree stand. I'm on my way up the tripod when I suddenly hear a loud thump. A tree fell, but thinking it coincidental, I continue my climb. Another tree soon falls and I stop. I'm actually worried and looking into the distance. Suddenly, there is a high-pitched scream in the distance that I have never heard the likes of before. I couldn't describe it too well as I'm kind of deaf almost, and have an implant in my ear that helps me hear as it is. It was when I was almost at the top, I see a monster buck running for its life. I quickly slide down to grab my crossbow when I suddenly see this huge dog-like figure staring me in the eyes. It's now standing on its back legs. I was too afraid to move when my great-grandfather shows up on an ATV and yells for me to get on. I hop on, and he and I leave. Later on, my hunting pal, I'll keep his name private, mentioned to me a story about a black dog-like figure that would prowl the woods. I believe it was the Dog Man. And if you ever encounter one, you need to do exactly what me and my grandfather did, and just run. This happened roughly a year ago. I have been hunting for 30 years, and in all that time I've never seen something like I saw on this day. I am quite familiar with the woods, and I have no problem handling myself. On this day though, I'd been hunting all morning, and it was about noon now. I was beginning to get this eerie feeling like I was being watched, but even more so, stalked. I turned around slowly, and didn't see anything. The forest is normally alive with wildlife and there is generally all sorts of noise. But, at this point anyway, there was absolutely nothing. No shrubbery moving, no birds chirping. It was deafening silence. I continued my hunt, watching closely, hoping to find a deer I could be proud of, a real trophy buck. What I found instead was far more scarier. Looking a short ways away, I almost didn't notice it at first as it was so still. I saw something staring right at me. This beast, that I mistook for a deer before examining it more closely, stood at 7 foot, 4 inches tall, and his antlers looked like trees. It had the eyes of a cat, was completely silent, even when moving, and it simply just stared at me. Before I knew I had heard a sound to my left, I looked over for a second and saw nothing, and looked back toward the figure only to realize it had vanished. Looking at my phone, I realized it was around 5. Looking at my phone, I realized it was around 5, when it was just noon moments ago. I was supposed to be in from hunting at 1 in the afternoon, but somehow, the time had flown by. I'm not sure what the thing I saw in the woods was, but I'm positive it wasn't a deer. I can't explain the missing time either. Any explanation would definitely be appreciated. This is my grandmother's story from when she was living in Czechoslovakia. When she was younger, she lived in a village near a forest. She had friends in the far but neighboring village and regularly went there to play table tennis. The village had a road around the forest where you could cut through it and can get there in half the time. Everything was normal, but my grandmother had stayed longer than she was allowed to, and it became night. This was before phones, and she knew where her mom would be, and she knew that she would be very angry coming home so late. She started walking home, cutting through the forest, something she did quite often, when suddenly she had a bad feeling and felt like she was being watched. She had all of a sudden noticed that the forest was silent and had become, somehow infested with a pungent odor that she couldn't even describe. She said it gave her an overwhelming fear, which was made even worse when suddenly hearing a noise. Scared, she was hugging a tree until the feeling passed, but soon she realized that she couldn't stop hugging the tree. She tried to pull away from the tree, but it would not let go. Finally, it let her go and she flew home. Upon arriving home, she knocked on the door and her mother answered, very angry, and she started apologizing. Her mom started yelling at her for not replying to her when she got home. My grandmother tried to explain that she had not only just got home now, but her mother wasn't listening to what she had been saying. My grandmother doesn't know what happened back in Czechoslovakia, and I don't either. I have never heard a story like it before, and I'm not so sure this is even a monster, or maybe even counts as a sighting. This story scares me more than anything else because the woods, they just seem to hold so many mysteries. Whether this was some creepy spiritual monster or just a paranoid little girl, we'll never know, I guess. But thanks for sharing my story anyway. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed these allegedly true encounters with cryptid creatures, be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the channel, why not subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. Once again, much love to my friends from the Stranges who helped me read story number 2. They have a great channel and I think you'll really enjoy their content. We did a video together today as well, on the Jersey Devil and other creepy cryptids, so be sure to check out that video. You can find it in the description down below. If you guys have a story you'd like to share in a future video, be sure to send it in to swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story. If you would like to talk to me on a more personal basis outside of YouTube, Twitter and Instagram are some of the best places to do that. You can follow me on Twitter at iSwampDweller or Instagram at SwampDwellerOfficial. I'd love to see and talk with you guys over there. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.